A number of players falling out on both sides. Shead played 44 minutes and 42 seconds, fouled out with 18.2 ticks remaining in overtime and in OT. It's the Houston Cougars outlasting Texas A&M. What looked like it would be a cruise control victory was anything but. The Cougs survive and advance in a literal sense. This one, a bit of a ref show at times. 75 total free throws attempted in this game, and the difference in it, A&M missed 16 free throws on the night. You heard him, now you see him. Chip Patterson in with the latest off of what was one of the best games we've seen all tournament long. We're sitting here getting ready to have the conversation about a commanding Houston victory, up double digits, inside 2 minutes, and back comes roaring this Texas A&M team. Obviously, you're going to look for things to coach your guys up on regardless of the situation. But
sure,
Houston goes home feeling different than they would have if they could have just salted this thing away in regulation. How does this serve them? How does this hurt them, having to go through this final 5 minutes of overtime?
I think you're very concerned that one of the top defensive teams in the entire country was not able to match what Houston's offense had done. I mean, Houston shot 52% from the field. They exceeded most of their season averages in terms of being able to fill it up and put the ball in the basket, but when they needed those stops in crucial possessions, they couldn't come up with it. And some of that was maybe because of the foul trouble. You defend differently when you do have 4 fouls and you don't want to pick up that 5th. But here in this game, you really thought that Kelvin Sampson's team was going to be able to get those stops. Credit Buzz Williams' Texas A&M team. They had that offensive firepower. We saw it in the SEC tournament. We certainly saw it in the first round as well. You knew that they could score and score quickly with players like Wade Taylor leading the way. I just didn't think that Houston, with that lead, with that excellence that they have shown defensively, I just didn't think they would give it up. So, I mean, if you are Kelvin Sampson, you coach it up, right? You know, you put on the tape, you show all the breakdowns, you show what went wrong. But me, analyzing this team, trying to project and predict what will happen moving forward, taking notes.
To your point, not the traditional Houston win here. It's the most points they've scored this season and the most points they've allowed this season. They don't want to get into those types of track meets. They want to meet you in the half court. They want to stop what you do. Whatever it is, whatever it took, they are moving on to the Sweet 16. We have all 4 1 seeds alive and well, in some terms, heading to the Sweet 16. But much to the thanks of Jamal Shead and what he was throughout this game, especially in overtime. 21, 10, and 5, played almost every single second of this contest. What did you make of his performance and just the steely-eyed look on his face as he salted this thing away?
Right. Kelvin Sampson tells a great story about recruiting Jamal Shead. You know, Jamal Shead's from Austin, but Texas didn't want a piece of him. Undersized guard who they weren't really sure what he would blossom into at the college level. But Kelvin Sampson always will say, I'll take Jamal Shead over any of your 5-star prospects because I know the kind of competitor that he is. I know the fearlessness that he shows. You know, I mentioned that game winner with less than a second left against Oklahoma earlier in the season. There's just never been a doubt whenever Houston has been in a tricky situation who is going to get the ball and what they are going to do. 4 years in this program. The transfer portal era has players moving all over the place. Jamal Shead has been the most reliable piece of Houston's success in this modern Kelvin Sampson-led run. I'm not surprised he comes up with the big bucket. Incredibly impressed by his effort. And if you are betting on Houston, you are betting on more of this from Shead moving forward.
Let's spin it as a positive then, because over the last 4 contests, this is a Houston team that's put out some of their best offensive outputs. You see 100+ in this one, 100 points in this victory. Overtime, yes, but even in regulation, they had scored at a clip not expected. 86 in round 1 against Longwood. They did have the 41 in the loss to Iowa State, but prior to that, 82 against a Texas Tech team. Is this a team that's learning themselves offensively at the perfect time in your eyes?
I think that they learned the lesson from the Iowa State game. You know, that was one thing that I thought Houston, if they would be able to flush that and be able to come into this tournament and be able to find a little bit of a rhythm, that could be something that's very informative for them because they dominated so many of their opponents, and they just, in those regular season games on a random Tuesday night in Big 12 play, going up against the way that Houston plays defense, defense will eliminate your will to compete. And that is the whole mindset. It's why they play defense the way that they do. But now that we're in that one-and-done scenario, win or go home, I think that they're going to meet some more resistance from the opponents. You're not going to go home as easily, and that's why being able to score becomes as important as being able to defend at an elite level. Their defense wasn't there, but tonight they were able to score enough to keep dancing.
I mean, you see it under Calvin Sampson's tutelage. This is a team that has seen some of the best basketball in the history of its program. The great elusive still is out in front of them and still available to them. Not just them, but all of our top seeds, 1s and 2s, all moving on to the Sweet 16. It's only the 5th time we've seen it since we've seen this format. What do you make of, I don't want to call it chalk because we do have teams out there, Clemson, and some other teams moving on that could throw a wrench into this sort of chalk look to our Sweet 16 Elite 8 brackets. But 1s and 2s moving on here, Chip. Is this something you foresaw? I mean, no one wants to sit here and push through all 1s and 2s, but it is the cream of the crop, and they have emerged as such here over our first week of the tournament.
Yeah, the line where I drew it was probably after 6, right? I thought that Iowa State was of that caliber where I expected them to advance. I think Arizona was of that caliber where I expected them to advance. Marquette got a really, really big test, you know, from Colorado. Tennessee got a little bit tricky from time to time. Couldn't make a daggone bucket against Texas. So it wasn't easy, and that's why I'm going to say it wasn't all chalky, because not every result was, you know, nice, easy, just write it in and cruise on to cash your paycheck. So I have always recognized that the very, very top is different. I mean, but very top, I'm talking about UConn, I'm talking about Houston, I'm talking about Purdue. We spent almost all the 2024 calendar year arguing about those 3 teams. Put them in whatever order you want, but that's been it. And so when we see these 1s and 2s advance, it does not surprise me, because it is kind of what we saw all year. There is a separation. But we see every year in the NCAA tournament, somebody from that mid-pack is able to rise up. And it often happens in the Sweet 16 and the Elite 8. We've said goodnight. We have said midnight to Cinderella all across the bracket. But now we are going to see, much like we did in the NCAA tournament last year, you know, 5 seeds, 7 seeds, 8 seeds, some real havoc being caused in the second weekend. So the vulnerability that we saw from Houston is something to take note of as we move forward in that very competitive South region.
Well, I'm glad you used that word vulnerability, because it's a Duke team that appears to be the least vulnerable they've been all season, almost peaking as this Houston team sort of has some things to figure out. That is our head-to-head, and you have almost a full week. I mean, five days to advance scout your opponent, which is not the case when you're moving from round 1 to round 2 or round 3 to round 4. I mean, this is when you get to chew on some film. Who do you give the advantage between these 2 teams in their current form?
The Duke Blue Devils. Jared McCain is a difference maker. When you have that high-end NBA talent and it is unlocked at the right time, it almost catches opponents by surprise, because you can break down all the stats, you can break down all the film, figure out all the different trends, but there's not a defense, there is not a one thing you can scheme up that can stop somebody who is just going to go absolute flamethrower from behind the arc the way that Jared McCain did in this game against James Madison. Look, they beat a 13 Vermont, they beat a 12 James Madison. It's not like their NCAA tournament profile has changed, but what I saw from the Duke Blue Devils, especially in the win against the Dukes, was the fact that they were closer to their potential and closer to their ceiling than Duke has been in a really, really long time. And that is something that you're encouraged by. You're not relying on Kyle Filipowski. You're not putting too much on Tyrese Proctor's plate. You're able to use a balanced effort with all the different weapons. There is a lot more firepower for Duke than what Texas A&M has. Houston's challenge is getting exponentially more difficult. I give Duke an edge right now in this matchup. I got to run the Chipalytics. You know, I got to, you know, I marry vibes and science, and we come up with a pick, you know, it'll do time. But right now, coming out of this, Houston glad to be alive. Duke's playing with its hair on fire.
We will see if the Bunsen burners turn out anything else throughout the week, but we like to say it. There's only one way to find out. We got Houston and Duke going up in the Sweet 16 as we take a look at how sweet it is. Houston and Duke, NC State and Marquette. That is your Dallas, Texas Sweet 16. As we move on, Texas A&M moves out. It's a 1 and a 4 meeting on Friday.